A single dad stops to fix a millionaire CEO's car on a deserted mountain road in Colorado. He refuses her money, gives her a kind smile, and drives away. But as Claire Donovan watches his taillights fade into the distance, something clicks deep in her chest. That voice, those eyes, the way he moved with quiet confidence, no wasted motion, just competence born from years of using his hands to solve problems. And suddenly she realizes he's not just some stranger. He's the first love she lost 15 years ago, the one she never stopped thinking about. And he doesn't even recognize her. The Mercedes E-Class had tried the ignition 4 times already. Each attempt yielded the same result. Silence, not even a sputter. Just expensive metal refusing to cooperate. Claire stepped out onto the gravel shoulder, her Armani heels crunching against the stones. The mountain stretched endlessly in both directions, beautiful and completely useless. Her phone showed 1 bar of signal, then none, then one again, a cruel tease mocking her predicament. Of course. Of all the days for this to happen. The irony wasn't lost on her. This morning she'd stood in front of 40 executives in Denver, closed a deal worth $40 million. She'd commanded that room with confidence, precision, authority that came from 15 years of clawing her way up from nothing. And now stranded on a mountain road with a dead battery, she couldn't even get her car to start. That's when she heard the engine rumbling closer. An old Ford F-250 paint faded from years of Colorado sun and hard work rolled to a stop behind her disabled vehicle. The door creaked open and a man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a work shirt with grease stains on the sleeves and jeans that had seen better days. His face was weathered but kind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, even when life gave him reasons not to. He looked at her car, then at her, and tilted his head slightly in that universal gesture of mechanical assessment. Engine trouble. Claire felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe. Or caution, born from too many years navigating boardrooms full of men who wanted something from her. It won't start. I don't know what's wrong with it. Mind if I take a look, huh? She hesitated for only a second, weighing risk against necessity. Please. He walked over with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands, who understood machines in a way that couldn't be taught in any classroom. He popped the hood without asking permission, leaning in to inspect the engine with practiced efficiency. Claire stood back watching him work, and that's when it started, that strange, nagging feeling in the back of her mind, pulling at memories she'd tried to bury under years of ambition and achievement. Something about him felt familiar in a way that made her heart beat faster. When's the last time you had the battery checked? His voice, low and warm, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the mountain chill. I'm not sure. I just bought this car 6 months ago. Could be a loose terminal. Let me see if I've got something in the truck. He walked back to his vehicle, rummaged through a toolbox in the bed, and returned with a wrench. Claire watched his hands as he worked, steady and capable, sure of every movement. Those hands triggered another flash of memory, but it slipped away before she could grasp it fully, leaving only an echo of something important she'd forgotten. I'm Claire, by the way. He glanced up briefly, offering a small smile that stopped her breath in her throat. Ethan. The name didn't ring any bells immediately, but that smile. God, that smile. It was warm and genuine, the kind of smile that made you feel like everything would be okay. Like the world wasn't quite as cold and competitive as she'd learned it to be. She'd seen that smile before. She was certain of it. You live around here, about 15 minutes down the road, run an auto shop in Ridgemont. He tightened something with the wrench, then straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans in a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. Try it now. Claire slid back into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth and perfect, as if it had never failed her at all. Oh my God, thank you. Thank you so much. Ethan closed the hood and wiped his hands again this time on a rag he'd pulled from his back pocket. Just a loose battery terminal. Happens sometimes. Claire stepped out of the car, reaching for her purse with hands that trembled slightly, though she couldn't have explained why. Let me pay you. Seriously, how much do I owe you? Nothing. She blinked, certain she'd misheard. No, really. I insist. It took you 15 minutes maybe. I don't charge neighbors for roadside help, but I'm not a neighbor. I'm from Denver. Then consider it Colorado hospitality. There was no arguing with him. Claire could see that in the set of his jaw, the quiet firmness in his eyes. This wasn't false modesty or some manipulative play to make her feel indebted. He genuinely didn't want payment for helping someone in need. The realization unsettled her in ways she couldn't articulate because in her world everyone wanted something. Everyone had an angle. Then at least take this. She pulled out one of her business cards, holding it out to him with fingers that weren't quite steady. If you ever need anything at all, please call me. Ethan took the card, glancing at it briefly. His eyebrows rose slightly when he read the title beneath her name. CEO. Donovan Enterprises. The way he said it carried no judgment, just mild surprise and perhaps a flicker of something else, something that vanished too quickly for her to identify. Well, I hope the rest of your drive goes smoother. Thank you again. Really? He nodded, gave her one more of those warm smiles that sent her pulse racing for reasons she refused to examine, and walked back to his truck. Claire stood there watching as he climbed in, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road. She watched his taillights fade into the distance, growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared around a curve. And that's when it hit her with the force of a physical blow. That smile, that kindness, the way he looked at her really looked at her like she was a person and not just a title or a bank account or a stepping stone to something bigger. She knew him. Her breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced backward, sifting through years of memories, searching desperately for where she'd seen that face before. And then, like a photograph developing in slow motion, it came into focus with devastating clarity. 15 years ago. Westfield University. The library steps on a cold October night. She'd been walking back to her dorm late, exhausted from studying and her second job in the campus cafeteria when a group of drunk fraternity brothers had cornered her. Their crude comments and blocking her path had frozen her with fear, uncertainty about what to do, how to escape without making things worse. And then he'd appeared. A guy from her physics class, someone she'd barely spoken to beyond comparing notes and discussing problem sets. He'd stepped between her and them with a quiet, commanding presence that made the drunk boys back off without a single punch thrown. The calm authority in his voice when he'd said they should leave had been more effective than any threat of violence. He'd walked her back to her dorm that night. They'd talked for hours on the steps, and in those hours Claire had felt something she'd never felt before in her hard Scrabble life. Seen. Understood. Safe in a way that had nothing to do with physical protection and everything to do with being recognized as fully human. His name had been Ethan. Ethan Cole. Claire's hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone, fingers fumbling over the screen. She stared at the business card still clutched in her other hand, her heart pounding against her ribs hard enough to hurt. It was him. After all these years, it was really him, and he didn't remember her at all. Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay in her king-sized bed in her empty Denver penthouse, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of their encounter on that mountain road. The way Ethan had looked at her, kind, helpful, but distant, like she was just another stranded motorist, another stranger whose car needed fixing. Not like someone he'd once stayed up all night talking to about dreams and fears and futures that felt impossibly far away when you were 23 and broke and terrified of failing. He didn't remember her. The realization cut deeper than she'd expected, opening wounds she thought she'd sealed shut years ago with ambition and success. 15 years ago, she'd been nobody. A scared freshman from a broken home wearing second-hand clothes held together with determination and a full scholarship she couldn't afford to lose. Her mother's alcoholism had left scars that went deeper than physical, and college had been her escape route, her one chance to become someone different, someone who mattered. But that night on the library steps, when those men had cornered her and Ethan had stepped in, she'd felt like somebody for the first time in her life. Like she was worth protecting, worth staying up all night to talk to about everything and nothing. They'd discussed their dreams that night, sharing confessions that felt monumental in the darkness. She'd told him about wanting to change the world through business to prove that someone from her background could build something meaningful. He'd shared his own aspirations, simpler but no less genuine. He wanted to work with his hands, build things. Maybe own his own shop someday where he could help people and make an honest living. When the sun came up, he'd kissed her. Soft and gentle, like she was something precious that might break if he wasn't careful. It had been her first real kiss, the kind that meant something beyond fumbling teenage experimentation. Then he was gone. 1 week later, just vanished from campus like smoke dissipating in wind. She'd searched for him desperately, asked everyone who might know where Ethan Cole had disappeared to. But he'd deleted his minimal social media presence, changed his phone number, left no forwarding address. It was as if he'd never existed at all. Eventually, through a classmate who knew someone who knew his roommate, she'd learned the truth. His mother had been diagnosed with cancer. He'd had to drop out, go home, take care of her. No money for tuition anymore. No time for anything except survival and caregiving. Claire had been heartbroken, but she'd channeled that pain into fuel. If she couldn't have Ethan, she could at least prove to herself that the girl he'd seen that night, smart, capable, destined for something more, had been real. She'd worked harder, studied longer, graduated with honors, and launched herself into the business world with single-minded determination. She'd built Donovan Enterprises from nothing, clawing her way up through sheer force of will and strategic brilliance that came from having no safety net to catch her if she fell. Every deal closed, every competitor outmaneuvered, every quarter of growth had been proof that she wasn't that scared girl anymore. She was someone who mattered, someone with power and influence, and a name that commanded respect. But she'd never forgotten Ethan Cole, never stopped measuring other men against the memory of someone who'd protected her without expecting anything in return, who'd talked to her about dreams instead of using her vulnerability as an opportunity. Now, lying in her penthouse with Denver's lights glittering below like earthbound stars, Claire grabbed her phone off the nightstand. 3 a.m, but sleep was impossible anyway. She pulled up Google, typed in his name with trembling fingers. Cole Auto Repair appeared immediately, complete with reviews. Photos, a simple website that probably hadn't been updated in years. There was a picture of Ethan standing in front of the shop, arms crossed, wearing that same quiet smile. Older, more weathered, but unmistakably him. The reviews painted a picture that made her throat tight. Customers praising his honesty, his fair prices, his willingness to help people who couldn't afford full repairs. One review from a single mother. He fixed my car for free when I had no money and 3 kids to feed. Another from an elderly man. Ethan taught my grandson basic mechanics instead of charging me for simple maintenance. These weren't just testimonials about a good mechanic. They were evidence of a good man. She switched to Facebook, found his public profile. The photos there stopped her heart. Ethan with a little girl who had his warm brown eyes and dark curls that caught the light. Emma judging by the captions. 8 years old, soccer games and science fairs and camping trips. A simple life documented in snapshots that radiated more genuine happiness than any of Claire's carefully curated business success photos ever had. No wife visible in any recent photos. She scrolled back looking for context and found it in an obituary that made her eyes burn with tears she hadn't cried in years. Sarah Cole née Mitchell died 4 years ago in a car accident on Highway 70. beloved wife, devoted mother to Emma, elementary school teacher who touched countless young lives. Survived by her husband Ethan and daughter Emma, age 4. Claire closed her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. Ethan had built a life without her, married someone, had a child, lost his wife in the kind of sudden tragedy that reshaped everything. He'd carried on somehow, raising his daughter alone while running a business, and apparently being the kind of person who helped stranded strangers without expecting payment. And through all of that, he'd had no idea that the scared girl he'd rescued 15 years ago had been thinking about him, measuring her success against the memory of someone who'd made her feel worthy of protection and care. The question burning in her chest wasn't whether she had the right to step back into his life. It was whether she had the courage to find out if any part of him still existed in the man he'd become, and if any part of that girl he'd stayed up all night talking to still existed in the CEO she'd turned herself into. She couldn't just walk away. Not after spending 15 years wondering what if. Not when fate or chance or whatever force governed the universe had put him back in her path on a mountain road where her expensive car had broken down and his competent hands had fixed it. Claire made her decision as dawn broke over Denver's skyline, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and pink. She'd go back, find a legitimate reason to thank him properly, see if there was anything left of what they'd shared that night, or if it had been nothing more than a moment that meant everything to her and barely registered for him. By 9 a.m., she was back on the road to Ridgemont, telling herself this was about closure, about putting 15-year-old ghosts to rest. The lie was transparent even to her own mind, but she clung to it anyway as she drove toward the small mountain town where Ethan Cole had built his life. Cole Auto Repair was a modest building on Main Street, sandwiched between a hardware store that looked older than she was and a coffee shop with hand-painted signs advertising locally roasted beans. Claire parked across the street, suddenly uncertain. What was she doing here? What could she possibly say that wouldn't sound desperate or delusional? But before she could talk herself into leaving, Ethan looked up from under the hood of a Chevy truck, saw her car through the bay window, and waved. Recognition without memory, just a friendly gesture to someone he'd helped yesterday. There was no backing out now. The shop smelled like motor oil and metal, familiar scents that triggered more memories of that night when he'd explained physics concepts using car engines as examples, making theory concrete in a way their textbook never had. A woman at the front desk. 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled into a practical ponytail, smiled at her entrance. "Help you with something?" Claire opened her mouth, then closed it as Ethan emerged from the service bay, wiping his hands on a rag. His surprise was genuine, pleasant, but confused. "Claire, everything okay with the car?" The sound of her name in his voice, even without recognition attached to it, made her pulse quicken. "The car's perfect. I brought lunch, to say thank you properly, if you have time." Something flickered across Ethan's face. Hesitation, maybe, or uncertainty about why a CEO would drive 90 minutes to bring lunch to a mechanic who'd tightened a battery terminal. He glanced back at the shop, then at her, weighing considerations she could only guess at. "Yeah, I can take a break." They ended up at the coffee shop next door, sitting at a small table by the window, where she could see his truck parked outside the shop. Claire had brought sandwiches from an upscale Denver deli, suddenly hyper-aware of how out of place the expensive packaging looked in this simple mountain town. Ethan unwrapped his without comment, but she caught the slight raise of his eyebrows. "You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. You saved me from missing the biggest meeting of my quarter." Ethan took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. Just tightening a bolt. Not exactly heroic. They ate in silence for a moment, Claire's mind racing through possible conversation starters that wouldn't immediately reveal her true purpose. But Ethan spoke first, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity mixed with something that might have been wariness. "Can I ask you something?" Claire's heart jumped. "Of course, yesterday when you gave me your card." "Claire Donovan, CEO. You're that Claire Donovan. I looked you up last night." The admission surprised her, sent a flutter of something hopeful through her chest even as his next words crushed it. You've done incredible things. Built an empire from nothing, apparently. Why are you really here? Claire set down her sandwich, hands trembling slightly. This was it. The moment where she could tell the truth or maintain the pretense that this was just gratitude. I told you. To thank you. People like you don't drive an hour each way to bring lunch to a small-town mechanic. So what is this really about? His voice was gentle but firm, the same tone he'd used with those drunk fraternity brothers 15 years ago. Not aggressive, just absolutely certain of his boundaries. Claire felt the walls she'd built around herself, CEO armor designed to intimidate and impress, crumbling under that steady gaze. You think I'm slumming it? That this is some kind of charity? Hurt flashed across his features, quickly masked. I don't know what to think. You're a CEO. I fix cars and go home to frozen dinners and an 8-year-old daughter. We live in different worlds. We didn't always. The words escaped before she could stop them, hanging in the air between them like a challenge. Ethan's expression shifted, confusion mixing with something that looked like concentration, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. What do you mean? Claire took a breath, committing to the truth now that she'd started down this path. Westfield University. 15 years ago. We had physics together, Professor Morrison's class. Ethan's eyes widened slightly, his sandwich forgotten. I was only there for 3 semesters. Had to leave when my mom got sick. I don't. Do you remember? October 23rd. Outside the library, she watched him carefully, saw the moment his memory stirred, reaching back through 15 years of life and loss and raising a daughter alone. Recognition dawned slowly, then all at once his face transforming with shock. There was a girl. Some guys were hassling her after the library closed. I walked her home. That was me, Ethan. He stared at her, really stared this time, looking past the expensive clothes and professional hair and 15 years of transformation. Claire. That was you. She saw it happening in real time, his mind overlaying the scared college student with brown hair and glasses and 40 fewer pounds onto the polished CEO sitting across from him, the pieces clicking into place with almost audible force. Oh my God. I looked for you. After I had to leave school, I tried to find you, but I didn't have your number. Didn't know your last name. You were just Tori from physics class. Miller was my mother's last name. I changed it after graduation, wanted to leave that version of myself behind. Something broke open in Claire's chest at his confession, at learning he'd searched for her too, that their night together hadn't been as one-sided as she'd believed. I thought about you constantly. When you disappeared, I tried everything to track you down. But you were gone like you'd never existed. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, emotion thick in his throat when he spoke. My mom got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer the week after that night with you. Dad had died 2 years before. I was all she had. I couldn't afford school, and her treatment couldn't do anything except come home and work and try to keep her alive as long as possible. I'm so sorry. The inadequacy of those words hung between them, too small for the magnitude of what they'd both lost. Ethan shook his head, not dismissing her sympathy, but acknowledging its limitations. And now you're here. After all this time, you're actually here. Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. Ethan reached across the bench, his hand hovering near hers, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. I can't believe it's you. I can't believe I didn't recognize you yesterday. I look different. 40 pounds, different hair, contact lenses instead of glasses. 15 years of becoming someone else. No. He shook his head, his voice rough with something that sounded like regret. You look exactly the same where it counts. I just couldn't let myself believe that someone like you would remember someone like me. The words landed like a physical blow, revealing depths of insecurity she hadn't expected. Before Claire could respond, before she could tell him that he'd been the measuring stick for every man she'd met since the coffee shop door opened with a cheerful jingle, a yellow school bus was visible through the window, and a little girl with dark curls and Ethan's warm brown eyes bounded through the door, backpack covered in NASA patches bouncing against her small frame. Dad. Emma stopped short when she saw Claire sitting with her father, her expression shifting from excitement to something more guarded. The transformation was immediate and unmistakable. A child who'd learned to protect what mattered most. "Who's this?" Ethan's voice carried warmth, but also a note of something Claire couldn't quite identify. Caution, maybe, or the particular care of a single parent navigating his daughter's reaction to new people. "This is Claire, an old friend from college." Emma approached the table slowly, assessing Claire with the brutal honesty only children possess. Her gaze took in the expensive clothes, the manicured nails, the designer purse, cataloging differences between this stranger and the life she knew. "Hi." Claire smiled, trying to project warmth without pushing too hard. "Hi, Emma. It's nice to meet you." The girl didn't smile back, didn't soften the way children often did when adults showed them friendly attention. "Are you going to be Dad's girlfriend?" The bluntness of it made Ethan wince. "Emma, that's not, we're just talking." But Emma kept her eyes on Claire, waiting for an answer, with the patience of someone who'd learned that adults often lied to children about important things. "Your dad and I knew each other a long time ago. I'm just visiting." The answer satisfied nothing, but Emma seemed to accept it as the best she'd get. She turned to Ethan, her whole demeanor shifting back to the excited child who'd bounced through the door. "Can we go home? I'm hungry and I have homework about friction and you promised to help." "Of course, sweetheart. Let me just—" He looked at Claire, apology written in every line of his face. "I should go. Emma needs—" "I understand." But Emma was already heading for the door, clearly expecting her father to follow immediately. Ethan stood, hesitated, then spoke in a voice low enough that only Claire could hear. "This is a lot. You showing up after 15 years. I need to think about what it means, what you want. I just wanted to see you again. To know if there's anything left of what we had that night. If the guy you remember still exists." The vulnerability in his question stripped away pretense. "Yes." Ethan looked out the window where Emma waited by his truck, arms crossed in a posture that mirrored his own defensive stance. "I'm not that college kid anymore, Claire. I'm a widower raising a daughter who lost her mother when she was 4. I fix cars to pay the bills and I go home to microwave dinners because I never learned to cook anything else. That's my life. It's small and it's simple, and it's nothing like what you've built. Who says I built something better?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but they carried truth she'd been avoiding for years. Ethan studied her face, searching for something she hoped he'd find. "You should go back to Denver. Back to your empire and your meetings and your life that makes sense." But even as he said it, Claire caught the flicker in his eyes that suggested he didn't entirely mean it, that some part of him wanted her to argue, to insist, to fight for whatever fragile connection still existed between them. "What if I don't want to go back? What if I want to stay and figure out if the person I've been looking for all these years is still here?" Ethan's jaw clenched, emotion warring across his features. "Then you need to understand something. Emma comes first. Always. If you're going to be around, if you're going to... Whatever this is, she's part of it. And she's not easy. She's protective and scared, and she doesn't trust people who might leave. I'm not asking to replace anyone. I'm just asking for a chance to see if we can figure out what this is." Emma knocked on the window, impatience written in her small frown. Ethan raised a hand to acknowledge her, then turned back to Claire with something that looked like surrender mixed with hope. "I don't know if this is a good idea, but I can't pretend I'm not curious about who you've become, about whether any part of what we had that night was real or just something we both needed in the moment. It was real for me. Still is. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and terrifying. Ethan nodded slowly, processing implications Claire herself hadn't fully thought through. Come to Emma's science fair. Friday night, 6 p.m. at Ridgemont Elementary. If you're serious about understanding my life, start there. I'll be there. He gave her one more long look, something complicated and conflicted, then walked out to where his daughter waited. Claire watched them drive away Ethan's old truck rattling down Main Street and realized she'd just committed to something that terrified her more than any boardroom negotiation ever had. She'd committed to seeing if the man she'd built 15 years of fantasies around could coexist with the reality of who he'd become, and whether the woman she'd turned herself into could fit into a life that had no space for CEOs and empires, only for honest work, and a daughter who needed stability more than excitement. Claire spent the next 2 days in Ridgemont, telling herself she was working remotely, when really she was learning the rhythms of a town she'd never expected to care about. She rented a small cabin on the edge of town, set up her laptop at the coffee shop next to Cole Auto Repair, and pretended the proximity was coincidental. Maria, the woman who worked reception at Ethan's shop, saw through the pretense immediately. On Wednesday afternoon, she slid into the chair across from Claire without invitation, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a knowing smile. "You're the CEO from the car breakdown." Claire looked up from her laptop, caught off guard. "How did you small town?" "Word travels. Plus Ethan told me you two knew each other in college." Maria set one coffee in front of Claire, claiming the other for herself with the ease of someone who'd decided they were going to have this conversation, whether Claire wanted it or not. "What are you doing here, honey?" "And don't say work, because I've seen plenty of people work remotely, and none of them look at an auto shop the way you look at that one." The directness should have offended her, but something about Maria's warmth made defensiveness feel pointless. "I'm trying to figure out if I made a mistake 15 years ago, or if I'm making one now." Maria sipped her coffee, considering. "Ethan's a good man, best I've ever worked for. But he's been through hell. His mama's cancer, then losing Sarah so suddenly, raising Emma alone while trying to keep the business going. He doesn't need someone who's going to waltz in, stir everything up, then leave when it gets complicated. I'm not planning to leave. You planning to stay in Ridgemont, running a logistics empire from a coffee shop in a town of 5,000 people?" The question landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Claire had been avoiding thinking that far ahead, focusing on Ethan and ignoring the practical impossibilities of maintaining her business life while pursuing whatever this was. "I don't know yet. I'm trying to figure it out." "Well, figure it fast, because Emma's watching you like a hawk watches a snake, and that little girl's had enough people disappear from her life. She doesn't need another one." The conversation haunted Claire through Thursday as she attended virtual board meetings and approved strategic initiatives while watching Ethan work through the coffee shop window. He moved through his days with quiet competence, fixing cars with the same careful attention he'd given to explaining physics problems 15 years ago. Nothing flashy, nothing designed to impress, just solid work done right. Friday arrived faster than she expected, bringing with it nerves she hadn't felt since her first major investor pitch. This mattered more than business carried stakes that couldn't be quantified in revenue or market share. Emma's science fair was a test Claire hadn't studied for measuring qualities she wasn't sure she possessed. She arrived at Ridgemont Elementary at 5:45, early enough to feel awkward, but too anxious to wait any longer. The gymnasium had been transformed into a showcase of childhood ingenuity tables, covered in poster boards and models representing hours of work and parental guidance. Parents and teachers milled around their voices, creating a warm buzz of community that felt foreign to someone whose professional gatherings revolved around catered networking and strategic positioning. Emma's table was in the back corner, her project impossible to miss even from the entrance. The poster board proclaimed in careful letters, "Generating electricity from friction in daily life." Below, the title diagrams explained the concept with a clarity that suggested Ethan's teaching while the prototype device, a modified floor mat connected to LED lights, demonstrated practical application. Claire approached slowly, giving Emma time to notice her presence. The girl looked up from adjusting her display, surprise flickering across her face before it settled into something more guarded. "You came. I said I would." "I said I—" Emma shrugged, that universal gesture of children who'd learned not to count on adult promises. Lots of people say they'll do things. Doesn't mean they actually do them. The cynicism in an 8-year-old's voice broke something in Claire's chest. She knelt down beside the table, bringing herself to Emma's eye level rather than looming over her. "Your project looks amazing. Did you design the prototype yourself?" "Dad helped with the wiring, but I did the calculations for how much energy different friction sources could generate." "See?" Emma pointed to a chart showing projected power output from various activities: walking, door opening, even pencil writing. The thoroughness impressed Claire, reminded her of her own childhood need to prove herself through competence when other forms of validation weren't available. "This is really sophisticated work. You must have spent weeks on it." 5 weeks. "And I tested everything myself to make sure the math was right." Pride colored Emma's voice, the kind that came from knowing you'd done something well and wanting recognition for it. Before Claire could respond, the poster board support began tilting backward, the weight distribution thrown off by someone bumping the table behind them. Claire's hand shot out on instinct, catching the board before it could fall. But the position was unstable, the whole display threatening to collapse if she let go. "Emma, I need something to stabilize the back. Do you have extra supports?" "No. I used them all for the base. The judges are coming in 5 minutes." Panic edged into the girl's voice, the kind that preceded tears in children who prided themselves on competence. Claire scanned her surroundings, looking for anything that could work her mind shifting into the problem-solving mode that had built her company. Her purse. The business cards inside were thick stock, substantial enough to work if she could create the right angle. "I have an idea. Trust me." Emma nodded, desperation overriding suspicion. Claire pulled out her card holder, extracted a handful of cards, and began folding them into triangular supports. Physics she'd learned 15 years ago in Ethan's class came back principles of leverage and weight distribution that had seemed abstract in textbooks but proved concrete in crisis. She wedged the folded cards under the poster board's base at precise angles, creating a stable tripod that distributed weight evenly. The board stopped tilting, held firm even when Emma tested it with cautious pressure. "How did you know to do that?" "Your dad taught me. Same class where we met. He explained physics using car parts and real-world examples, making it all make sense in a way textbooks never did." Emma's expression shifted, curiosity breaking through her defensive walls. "Dad's really smart about that stuff. He can fix anything." "He is. And so are you, judging by this project." The judges arrived before Emma could respond, 3 teachers armed with clipboards and encouraging smiles. They asked technical questions that Emma answered with confidence, blooming under their attention, explaining her methodology and findings with the clear voice of someone who knew her subject. Cold. Claire stood back, watching the girl who'd been so hostile transform into an enthusiastic scientist discussing her passion. When the judges moved on to the next table, Emma turned to Claire with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Thank you for helping with the board. I was afraid it would fall and ruin everything." "Teamwork. Your dad taught me that too. Always use what you have to solve the problem in front of you." "You really knew Dad a long time ago, didn't you?" "Like you actually remember him. Not just making it up." The question carried weight beyond its simple words, as if Emma were trying to determine whether Claire's interest in her father was genuine or some incomprehensible adult game. "I knew him, and he was one of the best people I'd ever met." "Still is, apparently." Emma studied her with that unsettling directness children wielded like scalpels. "My mom died when I was 4. I don't remember much about her except feelings, you know, but Dad says—" I have her smile, and she loved teaching kids about science, just like I love learning about it. She sounds like an amazing person. She was. and Dad loved her a lot. He still does, I think, even though she's gone. The statement hung between them, a boundary being drawn with 8-year-old clarity. Claire understood the message. Emma's mother would always be part of their family, always hold space in Ethan's heart, and anyone entering their lives needed to accept that reality. Your dad has a big heart, big enough to love your mom and still have room for other people. That's a strength, not a limitation. Emma tilted her head, considering this perspective. Are you one of the other people? Before Claire could formulate an answer that was both honest and appropriate for a child's ears, Ethan's voice cut through the gymnasium noise. Emma, I made it. He rushed over, still wearing his work shirt with fresh grease stains, his face carrying the particular stress of a parent who'd promised to be somewhere and nearly failed. He stopped short when he saw Claire kneeling beside his daughter, his expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that looked like cautious pleasure. Claire, you actually came. I said I would. Emma tugged on his sleeve, eager to share her moment. Dad, I got 3rd place, and Claire helped me fix my board when it almost fell. She showed him the ribbon, bronze but treasured, and his face transformed with pride so pure it made Claire's throat tight. He scooped Emma up in a hug that lifted her off the ground, spinning her once before setting her back down. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. 3rd place is amazing. Claire helped. She used her business cards to make supports like physics with triangles and weight, and she said you taught her that. Ethan's gaze found Claire's. Over Emma's head, something complex and searching in his expression. She was a better student than I was, remembered things I'd forgotten I knew. The judges were announcing final winners, drawing families toward the front of the gymnasium. Emma grabbed both adults' hands, pulling them along with the unself-conscious assumption that they belonged together. Claire felt Ethan's fingers tense in Emma's grip, caught between following his daughter's lead and maintaining the boundaries he'd tried to establish. They stood at the edge of the crowd as the principal praised all participants and handed out certificates to category winners. Emma bounced on her toes when her name was called, rushing forward to accept her award with a grin that did indeed echo her mother's in its unguarded joy. When she returned clutching her certificate and ribbon like treasures, Ethan suggested they celebrate with ice cream from the local shop. Emma agreed with enthusiasm, then turned to Claire with an expression that mingled hope and residual wariness. Do you want to come? Dad makes really good sundaes at home. The invitation clearly surprised Ethan, but he didn't contradict his daughter. Instead, he looked at Claire with a question in his eyes that went deeper than ice cream, asking whether she was ready for the next step into their lives, however small it might seem. I'd love to, if that's okay with your dad. Ethan hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yeah, that's okay. More than okay, actually. They walked to the parking lot together, Emma chattering about her project and the other displays she'd seen, her natural enthusiasm breaking through the protective shell she'd worn earlier. Ethan's truck was parked next to Claire's rental sedan, and Emma climbed into the back seat of her father's vehicle with the automatic movements of routine. Follow us. It's about 10 minutes if you don't get stuck behind the mail truck. Ethan's directions were simple, but his voice carried undercurrents of significance. He was inviting her into his home, into the life he'd built without her, and both of them understood this meant something beyond dessert. The drive gave Claire time to process what she was doing, following a man she'd known for one night 15 years ago, to a house full of memories she hadn't been part of creating. By the time she pulled up behind Ethan's truck in the driveway of a modest ranch-style home, her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The house was exactly what she'd expected, well-maintained but showing its age, with a small yard and a basketball hoop that had seen better days. Emma led the way inside with the confidence of someone on her home territory, dropping her backpack by the door and heading straight for the kitchen. Claire stepped through the entrance more carefully, taking in details that told stories without words. Photos on the wall chronicled Emma's growth from infant to present, many, including a beautiful woman with warm brown eyes who must have been Sarah. The furniture was comfortable but worn, chosen for durability over style. Everything spoke of a life built on modest means and strong foundations, priorities that had nothing to do with impressing visitors. Make yourself at home. The living room's more comfortable than it looks. Ethan's voice carried a hint of self-consciousness, as if he were suddenly seeing his space through her eyes and finding it wanting. Claire wanted to tell him that his home felt more real than her expensive penthouse ever had, but Emma was already calling from the kitchen about ice cream flavors. The three of them assembled Sundays with a chaotic enthusiasm that Claire hadn't experienced since childhood, before her mother's alcoholism had made joy feel dangerous. Emma insisted on demonstrating the proper chocolate-to-vanilla ratio while Ethan explained his secret to perfect hot fudge consistency. Their easy rhythm spoke of countless evenings like this, small traditions that wove the fabric of their shared life. Sitting at Ethan's kitchen table with ice cream melting on her spoon, Claire felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd set out to prove herself worthy of the girl Ethan had walked home that night. But it was real in ways her success had never quite managed, to be grounded in daily rituals and genuine connection, rather than abstract achievements. Emma finished her sundae, first chocolate smeared at the corner of her mouth, in a way that made her look even younger than 8. "Can I watch a show before bed, Dad?" One episode, then teeth brushing and pajamas. She scampered off to the living room, leaving Ethan and Claire alone in the kitchen, with the comfortable silence of melting ice cream and unspoken questions. Ethan started clearing bowls with the automatic movements of single-parent efficiency. You don't have to stay if you have somewhere to be. Work or meetings or whatever CEOs do on Friday nights. I don't have anywhere to be. That's kind of the problem. The admission surprised them both. Ethan paused in his dishwashing, looking at her with new attention. What does that mean? Claire stood, needing movement to voice thoughts she'd been avoiding. It means I built this empire everyone's so impressed by, and it's empty. I go home to a penthouse where no one's waiting. I attend events where people want things from me but don't actually know me. I've succeeded by every metric I set for myself, and I'm lonelier than I was when I was that scared college kid eating ramen in her dorm. Ethan dried his hands on a dish towel, his expression careful. So what? You think you can just step into our lives and fix that loneliness? Use us as some kind of antidote to your empty penthouse? The edge in his voice made her wince, but she couldn't deny the accuracy of his words. That's not... I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? Claire, because from where I'm standing, you show up after 15 years, meet my daughter at her science fair, and suddenly you're having ice cream in my kitchen. I need to know what you want from this. From us. I want to see if the person I've been measuring everyone against for 15 years actually exists, or if I invented him to make sense of why I could never connect with anyone else. The raw honesty seemed to catch him off guard. He set down the dish towel, leaned against the counter with his arms crossed in a posture that was pure defense. And if that person doesn't exist, if I'm just some mechanic with a kid and a mortgage and no grand dreams beyond making it through each day, then at least I'll know. At least I can stop wondering what if and move forward with my actual life instead of this half version where nothing feels quite real because I'm always comparing it to a memory. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, the only sound Emma's television show filtering in from the living room. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned caution through painful experience. I'm scared, Claire. Scared that you'll figure out I'm not who you remember and disappear again. Scared that Emma will get attached and then lose another person she cares about. Scared that I'll start to believe this could work and then wake up alone again when you realize small-town life doesn't match your expectations. What if I'm scared too? What if I'm terrified that I've spent 15 years becoming someone who doesn't know how to be the kind of person who fits in a life like this? The vulnerability in her question seemed to crack something in Ethan's careful control. He crossed the small kitchen in 2 steps close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his work-worn frame. Then maybe we're both scared. Maybe that's where we start. Two people who have no idea what they're doing but are willing to try anyway. Claire's breath caught as his hand came up to cup her cheek, the gesture achingly gentle, despite the calluses on his palm. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her bridge, the 15 years between that dawn on the library steps and this kitchen that smelled like chocolate and possibility. But Emma's voice called from the living room, breaking the moment before it could fully form. "Dad, my show's over. Is Claire still here?" Ethan stepped back, his hand falling away, leaving Claire's skin cold where his touch had warmed it. "Yes, sweetheart, she's still here." Emma appeared in the doorway, her eyes sharp with the perception of children who'd learned to read adult undercurrents. "Are you going to stay for a while? Or do you have to go back to Denver tonight?" The question held more weight than its simple words suggested, asking not just about tonight, but about Claire's intentions toward the fragile ecosystem of their family. "I'm staying in Ridgemont for a bit. I rented a cabin so I can work remotely." Emma nodded slowly, processing this information with visible calculation. "That's good. Because if you're going to be Dad's friend, you should probably stick around long enough to actually be a friend, not just visiting." Out of the mouths of babes came wisdom that cut straight through pretense. Ethan looked at his daughter with something between pride and concern, recognizing her attempt to protect them both while also opening the door to possibility. Claire's right, though. She should probably head home now. It's getting late, and we all have big days tomorrow. The dismissal was gentle but firm, establishing boundaries, even as he'd just admitted to being willing to try. Claire understood the necessity, recognized that whatever this was between them needed to develop at a pace Emma could handle, not race forward on the momentum of 15-year-old memories. She said her goodbyes, thanked Emma for letting her share the celebration, and walked to her car with the feeling that she'd just passed some crucial test without quite understanding all the questions. Ethan walked her out, hands shoved in his pockets against the evening chill. "Thank you for coming tonight. It meant a lot to Emma, even if she's trying hard not to show it. She's protecting you both. I understand that. Do you? Because sometimes I wonder if people who've built what you've built can really understand what it's like to live small, to have your whole world fit in a 3-bedroom house and a daughter's smile." The words stung because they carried truth she'd been avoiding. Claire turned to face him fully, needing him to see the honesty in her eyes. "I don't understand your life, Ethan. I don't know what it's like to raise a child alone or run a business where you actually know every customer's name. But I want to learn. I want to understand. That has to count for something." Ethan studied her in the deepening twilight, his expression unreadable. "It counts. I'm just not sure if it's enough. But I guess we'll find out." He stepped back, creating distance that felt necessary and painful in equal measure. Claire got in her car, started the engine, and drove away, watching him in her rearview mirror, until the darkness swallowed his figure. Only then did she let the tears fall, overwhelmed by the complexity of wanting something she didn't know how to have, and being someone she wasn't sure could fit into the life she'd just glimpsed. The cabin she'd rented felt emptier than her Denver penthouse, filled with the echo of voices that weren't there and the ghost of possibilities she'd barely begun to explore. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening, and realized with dawning clarity that this was only the beginning. Whatever happened next would require more than nostalgia and half-remembered chemistry. It would require becoming someone new while honoring who she'd been, finding a way to bridge two lives that had diverged 15 years ago and might be too different now to ever truly reconnect. But Emma's face when she'd won 3rd place, Ethan's hand on her cheek in that kitchen, the possibility of belonging somewhere real instead of successful, these things pulled at her with a force that felt like gravity, inescapable and fundamental. She'd spent 15 years building an empire. Maybe it was time to learn how to build a home. The next 2 weeks settled into a rhythm that felt both natural and terrifying. Claire worked from the coffee shop most mornings, her laptop open to spreadsheets and video conferences while her attention drifted toward the garage across the street. Ethan would wave when he saw her through the window, small gestures that carried more weight than they should. Twice, she brought coffee for his whole crew, earning cautious acceptance from the mechanics, who clearly wondered what a CEO wanted with their boss. Once she ran into him at the grocery store, both of them reaching for the same brand of coffee, their hands brushing, in a moment that sent electricity up her arm. Emma remained the wild card, sometimes friendly and talkative, other times retreating behind walls that reminded Claire painfully of her own childhood defenses. The girl tested boundaries with the precision of someone who'd learned that adults made promises they didn't keep, asking questions designed to catch inconsistencies. "How long are you staying? Do you have kids of your own?" "Why don't you live in Ridgemont if you like it so much?" Claire answered honestly, even when the truth revealed her own uncertainty. She didn't know how long she'd stay. She'd never had children because work consumed everything. She couldn't move to Ridgemont without dismantling a career she'd spent 15 years building. The admissions felt like failures, proof she didn't belong in their world of school pickups and little league games, and lives built around stability rather than ambition. Maria became an unexpected ally, offering insights into Ethan's world with the straightforwardness of someone who'd earned the right to speak bluntly. Over coffee on a Wednesday afternoon, she explained the reality Claire needed to understand. Sarah's death nearly destroyed him. Not just the grief, though, that was bad enough. The practical stuff. Learning to braid hair for Emma's school photos. Figuring out who to call when his daughter got her first period, which thank God hasn't happened yet, but it's coming. Being mother and father both when he barely knew how to be a decent father on his own. The picture Maria painted was far removed from Claire's corporate battles, grounded in daily survival rather than strategic victories. Ethan had learned to pack lunches that met nutritional guidelines while still including treats Emma would actually eat. He'd mastered the art of checking homework while running the shop's books, stealing moments between oil changes to help with multiplication tables. He'd become expert at reading his daughter's moods, knowing when silence meant she was processing something versus when it signaled the kind of sadness that required ice cream and bad movies. "He doesn't have space for games, honey. If you're going to be part of their lives, you need to be sure. Really sure. Because Emma's watching everything, cataloging every promise you make, waiting for you to prove you're just another person who'll leave." The warning lodged in Claire's chest like a stone, heavy with implications she couldn't ignore. That evening, alone in her cabin, with nothing but the sound of wind through pine trees, she forced herself to confront the question she'd been avoiding. What did she actually want from this nostalgic romance with a man she'd known for one night 15 years ago? An escape from the emptiness of her successful but lonely life? Or something real that would require sacrifices she wasn't sure she could make? Her phone buzzed with an email from her CFO. The subject line made her stomach drop. "Board meeting required. Southwestern freight situation." She opened it with dread already pooling in her gut. Southwestern Freight, their largest client accounting for 30% of revenue, was threatening to terminate their contract unless Claire returned to Denver full-time. They wanted face-to-face meetings, immediate responses, the kind of hands-on management she'd been providing remotely, but apparently not to their satisfaction. The email continued with clinical precision, laying out consequences. Losing Southwestern would mean layoffs, potentially dozens of people who depended on their jobs. It would mean admitting to her board that remote work wasn't sustainable for a CEO, that her Denver presence was non-negotiable. It would mean choosing between the company she'd built and the tentative possibility growing in Ridgemont. Claire stared at the screen until the words blurred her carefully constructed fantasy, colliding with economic reality. She'd been playing house, pretending she could maintain her empire while exploring a relationship that existed more in memory than present fact. The illusion shattered with the force of a 30% revenue loss. Thursday morning found her driving to the garage before she'd fully processed what she needed to say. Ethan was under a Dodge Ram, only his legs visible, the sound of tools against metal echoing in the bay. She waited until he rolled out on the creeper grease smeared across his forearm and a question in his eyes when he saw her expression. "We need to talk." He stood wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days, his posture shifting into something defensive. "That's never good." They walked to the small office behind the service bays, a cramped space with a desk buried under invoices and a calendar featuring classic cars. Ethan leaned against the desk, arms crossed, waiting with the patience of someone who'd learned to let other people explain their exits. "I got an email last night. My biggest client is threatening to leave unless I'm in Denver full-time. 30% of my revenue gone if I don't go back. So go back." The flatness in his voice hit harder than anger would have. He wasn't even going to fight for her, already accepting her departure as inevitable. "That's it. Just go back." "What do you want me to say, Claire? That you should sacrifice your company for someone you've known for 2 weeks in the present tense? That would be insane. But what about feelings? About a night 15 years ago that we've both built into something bigger than it probably was? That's not enough to base a life on." His words landed like blows, each one cracking the foundation she'd been building in her imagination. She wanted him to argue, to tell her the past 2 weeks meant something, to give her a reason to choose Ridgemont over Denver. Instead, he was doing the opposite, pushing her away with what sounded like cold pragmatism, but might have been self-protection. "You're saying this doesn't mean anything to you. I'm saying you have responsibilities. A company you built. People who depend on you. You can't throw that away for something that might not even work." Claire's anger flared hot and defensive. "That's convenient. You get to be the noble one telling me to leave so you don't have to risk getting hurt." Ethan's jaw clenched, emotion finally breaking through his careful neutrality. "You're damn right I don't want to get hurt. And I definitely don't want Emma hurt. She's already asking when you're leaving, Claire. 8 years old, and she knows better than to believe adults who say they're staying. Maybe because you've already decided I'm leaving. Maybe you're so convinced everyone abandons you that you push them away first." The accusation hung between them, sharp and potentially true. Ethan's eyes flashed with something that looked like recognition mixed with fury. "Don't psychoanalyze me. You don't know what it's like to what? To be scared, to build walls. I've been doing that my whole life, Ethan. The difference is I'm trying to tear mine down and you're fortifying yours." They stood in that cramped office, breathing hard, the air thick with words that had escalated faster than either intended. Maria's voice calling from the garage broke the standoff, reminding them both that this conversation was happening in the middle of his workday, with customers waiting. "I have to get back to work." Ethan moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "For what it's worth, I think you should go to Denver. Talk to your client face to face. Make whatever decision is right for your business. Don't make it about me or Emma or some fantasy about what we could be. And if I want your opinion on what we could be, we barely know each other. Claire, 2 weeks and some memories from 15 years ago doesn't make a relationship. It makes a nice story, but stories don't pay mortgages or raise kids or survive real life." He left before she could respond, the dismissal clear in the set of his shoulders as he returned to the customer whose transmission needed rebuilding. Claire stood alone in the office, surrounded by the mundane details of his daily existence, feeling like she'd been slapped awake from a dream she'd been nurturing since that moment on the mountain road. The drive to Denver that afternoon felt like retreat, her rental car eating up miles while her mind replayed their argument. Ethan's words had been harsh, but not entirely wrong. She had been building fantasies on a foundation of nostalgia, imagining she could somehow merge her CEO life with small-town domesticity without sacrificing either. The client crisis forced her to acknowledge what she'd been avoiding. Real choices had real costs. Her meeting with Southwestern Freight's executives was scheduled for Friday morning, which gave her Thursday evening to to prepare arguments, and Friday night to stare at her penthouse ceiling, feeling the emptiness Ethan had accurately identified. The space that had once represented success now felt like a monument to what she'd traded for achievement. No photos on the walls except generic art, no sounds except traffic from the street below. No one waiting to hear about her day or share the small victories that made life meaningful. The meeting itself went better than expected. Southwestern's CEO wasn't actually threatening to leave, he was testing whether Claire valued the account enough to prioritize it. When she laid out her plan for increased face time without abandoning remote work entirely, he accepted with the satisfaction of someone who'd gotten the attention he wanted. The crisis dissolved as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Claire with the hollow victory of keeping business she'd never really been in danger of losing. She drove back to Ridgemont Saturday morning with the distinct feeling that she'd failed a test she hadn't known she was taking. Ethan's prediction had come true. At the first sign of professional pressure, she'd run back to Denver, proving his point about where her real priorities lay. The fact that the crisis had been somewhat manufactured didn't change the truth it revealed. The garage was closed when she arrived Saturday afternoon, quiet on Main Street. She sat in her car debating whether to go to Ethan's house uninvited or wait until Monday to face whatever consequences their fight had created. The decision was taken from her hands when Emma appeared on the sidewalk riding a bicycle with training wheels that looked slightly too small for her. The girl spotted Claire's car and pedaled over with determination that allowed no escape. "You're back." "I'm back." Emma circled the car once assessing, then stopped with her sneakers planted firmly on the pavement. "Dad said you had to go to Denver for work. He said you might not come back." The casual delivery of those words hit harder than Ethan's anger had. This was what he'd been protecting against his daughter's matter-of-fact acceptance that adults disappeared. "I had a meeting, but I came back. This time. But you'll have more meetings, and someday you won't come back and Dad will be sad, and I'll have to make him feel better like I did when Mom died." The weight of expectation in an 8-year-old's voice broke something in Claire's chest. Emma wasn't being cruel or manipulative. She was simply stating what experience had taught her people left, and the ones who remained had to pick up the pieces. "I don't want to make your dad sad. Or you. Then don't. Just stay in Denver and let us go back to normal." Before Claire could respond, Ethan's truck pulled into the parking lot, apparently returning from errands. He saw Claire's car, saw Emma beside it, and his expression cycled through surprise, wariness, and resignation as he parked and climbed out. "Emma, why don't you ride over to the park? I'll meet you there in a few minutes." "But Dad, now please." The firmness in his tone sent Emma pedaling away with a backward glance that promised she'd demand details later. Ethan approached Claire's car with his hands shoved in his pockets, the defensive gesture she'd come to recognize. "You didn't have to come back. I wanted to. How'd the meeting go?" "Fine." They were bluffing, mostly just wanted attention. "I restructured some things so I can be in Denver 2 days a week instead of full remote." "So you're staying in Ridgemont. I'm trying. If you'll let me." Ethan looked down at the pavement, his jaw working like he was chewing words he didn't want to say. "Claire, I can't do this." The back and forth, the uncertainty. "Emma asked me this morning if you were her friend or just visiting, and I didn't know how to answer, because I don't know. I don't know what this is or what you want it to be. I want a chance to see if what we had 15 years ago can grow into something real now. To be part of your life and Emma's, if you'll let me. And when the next crisis hits, when your board demands something or a client threatens to leave or you wake up one day and realize small-town life isn't the escape you thought it would be." His voice carried the kind of exhaustion that came from being disappointed too many times. "Then we'll deal with it together. Like partners. Like people who care about each other. We barely know each other. You keep saying that like it's not true, but it is. 2 weeks, Claire. We've spent 2 weeks together in 15 years. That's not a foundation for anything except hurt when it falls apart." The certainty in his voice suggested he'd already written the ending, already decided failure was inevitable. Claire felt her own frustration rising, fed by 3 days of doubt and his stubborn refusal to see possibility. So, what you're just going to hide? Keep everyone at arm's length because Sarah died and you're scared of losing someone again. The words were out before she could stop them, harsh and potentially unforgivable. Ethan's face went white, then red, his hands curling into fists at his sides. You don't get to talk about Sarah. You didn't know her, didn't watch her die in a hospital bed, didn't have to explain to a 4-year-old why mommy wasn't coming home. You're right, I didn't. But I know what it's like to build walls so high that nothing can get through. I know what it's like to be so scared of getting hurt that you hurt yourself first by never letting anyone in. Ethan took a step back, breathing hard. This was a mistake. You coming here, me letting you in, all of it. We should have just left it as a nice memory and moved on. Maybe. Or maybe you're so convinced you don't deserve happiness that you sabotage it before it has a chance to develop. The conversation had spiraled beyond productive, both of them speaking from wounds rather than wisdom. Ethan shook his head, a gesture of finality that felt like a door closing. I need to go. Emma's waiting. He walked toward his truck without looking back, leaving Claire alone in the parking lot with the bitter taste of words she couldn't take back. She watched him drive away, the scene eerily similar to that first day on the mountain road, except this time she wasn't watching with hope. She was watching with the growing certainty that she'd just destroyed something before it had a chance to become real. The cabin felt oppressive that night, her laptop mocking her with emails that suddenly seemed trivial compared to the relationship she'd just torpedoed. She drafted responses to her board about the Southwestern situation, restructured her schedule to accommodate Denver days, made plans for promoting her COO into more operational responsibility. The work was familiar, comforting in its concrete challenges after the messy uncertainty of emotions she didn't know how to navigate. Sunday brought rain, the kind that drummed against the cabin roof with relentless persistence. Claire worked through conference calls and strategic planning, burying herself in the empire she'd built as refuge from the wreckage she'd created. By Monday, she'd convinced herself that Ethan was right. They'd been chasing ghosts, trying to resurrect something that had never really existed beyond one meaningful night and a lot of wishful thinking. Monday afternoon, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, expecting a sales call or wrong number. Emma's voice on the other end stopped her breath. Claire, it's Emma. Can you come pick me up? The tremor beneath the words triggered immediate alarm. Emma, where are you? Where's your dad? I'm at soccer practice, but Dad's stuck with a tow call and Mrs. Peterson can't wait anymore and I don't know what to do. The fear in the girl's voice cut through everything else. Claire was already grabbing her keys, heading for the door. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Where's the field? Emma gave directions, in a voice trying hard to stay steady, and Claire broke every speed limit getting there. The soccer field sat behind the elementary school, mostly empty now, except for one small figure sitting on a bench with a backpack beside her. Mrs. Peterson's minivan was pulling away as Claire arrived, the woman waving apologetically through her window. Emma stood as Claire approached, her face a mixture of relief and residual fear. Without thinking, Claire knelt and pulled the girl into a hug, feeling small arms wrap around her neck with surprising strength. I called Dad first, but he didn't answer, and then I tried the shop, but Maria said he was on a tow call, and I remembered your number from when you gave Dad your card. You did exactly right. I'm here now. They drove to Emma's house in silence, the girl directing Claire through turns she didn't need explained. When they pulled into the driveway, Emma finally spoke again. Are you and Dad fighting? He's been sad since Saturday. The direct question deserved an honest answer. We had a disagreement about whether I should stay or go back to Denver. Do you want to stay? Yes, but I don't think your dad wants me to. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt, her expression serious beyond her years. Dad wants you to stay. He's just scared you'll leave like everyone else. Like his mom and like my mom and like everyone who matters. The insight from an 8-year-old carried more wisdom than Claire had managed in days of overthinking. Before she could respond, Ethan's truck pulled into the driveway, his face cycling through confusion and concern when he saw Claire's car. Emma jumped out, running to her father with explanations tumbling over each other about practice and Mrs. Peterson and calling Claire. Ethan listened, his eyes finding Claire's over his daughter's head with an expression she couldn't read. "Thank you for picking her up. I had a breakdown on Highway 70, took longer than expected. It's fine, I'm glad she called." Emma tugged on Ethan's sleeve with the impatience of someone with important information. "Dad, can Claire stay for dinner?" "Please. She saved me from being stuck at school." Ethan hesitated, clearly, torn between gratitude and whatever boundaries he'd tried to establish Saturday. "I'm sure Claire has things I don't. I'd like to stay if that's okay." The permission came out more vulnerable than she'd intended, revealing how much she wanted this olive branch. Ethan studied her face, searching for something, then nodded slowly. "Okay. But I'm warning you, I'm making spaghetti and my cooking is nothing fancy. I don't need fancy." Dinner was awkward at first, conversation stilted around the elephant. Neither adult wanted to address in front of Emma, but the girl filled silences with chatter about soccer practice and a book report due Thursday, her presence forcing them into a simulacrum of normalcy that gradually felt less forced. Claire helped with dishes while Emma started homework at the kitchen table and in the mundane domesticity of soap and warm water. Some of the tension from Saturday began to dissolve. After Emma went to brush her teeth, Ethan finally addressed what had been hanging between them. "I'm sorry for what I said Saturday. About it being a mistake. I'm sorry, too, for bringing up Sarah like that. It was cruel and I had no right." They stood in his small kitchen, the space between them feeling both vast and negligible. "The thing is, you weren't entirely wrong. I am scared. Terrified, actually. Because I'm falling for you and I don't know what to do with that." The confession stopped. Her heart restarted it with a rhythm that felt dangerously like hope. "I'm falling for you too. Have been since that first day on the mountain road, maybe before, maybe for 15 years. But I don't know how to do this. How to be the person who fits in your life. Maybe neither of us knows. Maybe that's where we start. Two people who are scared but willing to try anyway." Emma's voice called from upstairs, asking for help with a tangle in her hair. Ethan looked toward the stairs, then back at Claire. "Stay. After I get her to bed, we should talk. Really talk about what this could look like if we're both brave enough." Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. She waited while he went upstairs, listening to the sounds of bedtime routines filtering down water, running Emma's protests about brushing thoroughly, Ethan's patient reminders. The ordinary soundtrack of family life that she'd never been part of, but desperately wanted to learn. When he came back down, they moved to the porch where this conversation had started 2 weeks ago. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cool, stars visible between breaking clouds. "I spoke with my board Friday. I'm restructuring so I can work mostly remote Denver 2 days a week. It'll mean stepping back from some operational control, promoting my COO to handle day-to-day while I focus on strategy." "That's a big change." "It is. And I'm terrified I'll resent it someday. Resent you for being the reason I made it." Ethan flinched but didn't look away. "That's fair. That's the fear I've had this whole time. But here's the thing. I've spent 15 years building an empire that left me empty. I've achieved everything I set out to prove, and it hasn't made me happy. Maybe it's time to try building something else. Something smaller, but more real. And if it doesn't work, if we try this and it falls apart, then at least we tried. At least we didn't spend another 15 years wondering what if." Ethan reached for her hand, his calloused fingers threading through hers with a gentleness that made her throat tight. "I can't promise this will be easy. Emma's got issues from losing her mom that therapy's helping with, but that doesn't make them go away. The shop doesn't make much money. Our life is small and sometimes boring and nothing like what you're used to. Maybe I don't want what I'm used to anymore. Maybe I want small and boring with people who matter." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the repetitive motion soothing. "I need to know you're serious, that you're not going to wake up in 6 months and realize you made a terrible mistake giving up your CEO life for a mechanic in nowhere, Colorado. Then let me prove it. Give me time to show you I'm not going anywhere. How much time, however long it takes. I've waited 15 years already. I can be patient now that I've found you again." He pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face the way he had in the kitchen that first night. This time there was no Emma to interrupt, no reasons to hold back except the ones they created themselves. When he kissed her, it carried all the weight of 15 years and 2 weeks, and the terrifying possibility of a future neither could predict, but both wanted to try for. They broke apart when breathing became necessary, foreheads resting together in the darkness. "This is insane. We barely know each other." "Then we'll learn. Day by day, moment by moment, we'll figure each other out. What if Emma doesn't accept this? She's been through enough. She called me today when she needed help. She's already accepting it more than you realize." Ethan pulled back enough to see her face in the dim porch light. "Okay, we try this. Slow because of Emma, but we try. Slow works for me." They sat on that porch until midnight talking about logistics and fears and hopes, with the honesty of people who'd already hurt each other and survived it. Claire would keep her cabin for now, maintaining some independence while they figured out what this relationship looked like. Ethan would work on trusting that she wouldn't disappear at the first sign of difficulty. Emma would be included in decisions that affected her, because she'd lost enough without also losing agency in her own life. When Claire finally drove back to her cabin, the future still terrified her. But for the first time in 15 years, the fear came packaged with hope instead of emptiness. She'd made the leap. Now she just had to pray she'd land somewhere soft instead of shattering on impact. The next 3 months unfolded with a rhythm that felt simultaneously natural and impossible. Claire restructured Donovan Enterprises around her absence, promoting Jessica Chen to CEO, while she shifted into the executive chair role. The board accepted the change with surprising grace, perhaps recognizing that a partially present founder was better than one who'd burned out completely. She spent Mondays and Tuesdays in Denver, the rest of the week in Ridgemont, and the transition carved her life into distinct halves that didn't quite fit together yet. Emma tested boundaries with scientific precision, asking questions designed to expose inconsistencies. If Claire said she'd be at soccer practice Thursday, Emma watched to see if she actually showed. If she promised to help with a science project, Emma waited to see if work would suddenly take priority. Each kept promise earned a fraction more trust, but the girl never fully relaxed, never stopped cataloging exits and preparing for eventual abandonment. Ethan navigated the space between them with careful deliberation, affectionate but cautious, always aware of his daughter watching their every interaction. They ate dinners together when Claire was in town, mundane evenings of homework help and dishwashing that felt more intimate than any corporate gala she'd attended. He kissed her goodnight on the porch, but never asked her to stay over, maintaining boundaries that Emma needed, even if they chafed against the urgency building between them. December brought the first real crisis, arriving in the form of Emma's school counselor requesting a meeting. Claire had been in Denver when Ethan called, his voice tight with stress that immediately triggered her protective instincts. Emma punched another girl at recess, drew blood from her nose, the school's talking suspension. The words didn't match the thoughtful child Claire had been getting to know, the one who solved math problems with methodical care and worried about injured birds. What happened? What did the other girl do? That's the thing. Emma won't say. She just shut down completely when they asked. Claire caught the next flight back, arriving at Ethan's house by evening to find him pacing the kitchen, while Emma sat at the table with her arms crossed, face set in stubborn silence. The girl looked up when Claire entered, surprise flickering across her features before the walls slammed back into place. "You came back early." "Of course I did. Your dad said you needed me." Something shifted in Emma's expression, a crack in the armor she'd been maintaining. Ethan gestured toward the living room, giving them space while making clear he was available if needed. Claire pulled out a chair sitting across from Emma with careful neutrality. "Want to tell me what happened?" Silence stretched between them, Emma picking at a loose thread on her sleeve with focused intensity. Claire waited, employing the patience she'd learned in boardroom negotiations when silence revealed more than questions. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lily said Mom died because of me. Said if I'd never been born, Mom wouldn't have been driving to pick me up that day and she'd still be alive." The words hit like a physical blow, explaining everything. Claire's hands clenched under the table, fury at a child cruel enough to weaponize another's trauma, mixing with heartbreak for Emma carrying this weight. "That's why you hit her." She kept saying it, over and over, that it was my fault, that Dad would be happier if I'd died instead. Emma's voice broke on the last word, tears finally spilling over barriers she'd been maintaining. Claire moved around the table without thinking, pulling the girl into her arms the way she wished someone had held her when she was young and hurting. "Listen to me. Your mom's death was not your fault. It was an accident. A terrible, unfair accident that had nothing to do with you being born or needing to be picked up from school. But if you hadn't existed, your mom and dad wouldn't have had you, which means they'd have missed out on this amazing, brilliant, fierce girl who makes their lives better every single day." Emma clung tighter, her small body shaking with sobs she'd apparently been holding back since the incident. Claire held her through it, making soothing sounds she didn't know she possessed, drawing on instincts she hadn't realized existed until faced with this child's raw pain. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face crumpling, when he saw his daughter finally breaking down. He crossed to them in 2 strides, wrapping both of them in his arms so they became a unit of shared grief and comfort. They stayed like that until Emma's sobs subsided into hiccups, until she pulled back with red eyes and a runny nose. "I'm sorry I hit her. I know violence isn't the answer." Her voice carried the rote quality of a lesson learned but not quite believed. Ethan brushed hair from her face with infinite gentleness. "Violence isn't the answer. But I understand why you did it, and we'll work through the consequences together." The school agreed to reduce Emma's suspension from 3 days to 1 after Ethan explained the circumstances, with the condition that she attend counseling sessions. Claire offered to adjust her schedule to be there for the appointment, earning another crack in Emma's defensive walls when the girl reached for her hand in the waiting room. The counselor, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and credentials framed on every wall, spoke with Emma privately before inviting the adults in. Her assessment was both reassuring and concerning. Emma's been carrying tremendous guilt about her mother's death. It's common in children who lose a parent, this magical thinking that they somehow caused or could have prevented the loss. The other girl's comments triggered something Emma's been suppressing for years. She sat across from them, hands folded with professional calm. "The good news is, Emma's willing to work on this. The hard news is, it will take time, possibly years of processing, and she'll need consistent support from both of you." The casual assumption that Claire would be part of Emma's long-term support system should have felt presumptuous. Instead, it felt like recognition of a truth they'd all been dancing around. Claire was in this now, committed in ways that went beyond romance with Ethan, into the messier territory of helping raise a traumatized child. Driving home from the session, Emma spoke from the back seat with unusual directness. "Are you going to marry Dad?" The question froze both adults, Ethan's hands tightening on the wheel, while Claire's breath caught. She turned to look at Emma, finding genuine curiosity rather than hostility in the girl's expression. "We haven't talked about that yet. Why do you ask?" "Because if you're going to be around for years, like the counselor said, it seems like you should probably make it official. Otherwise, you might leave, and then I'd be sad, and Dad would be sad, and it would be worse than if you'd never come at all." The 8-year-old logic carried painful wisdom, acknowledging both hope and fear in equal measure. Ethan pulled into the driveway, turning to face his daughter with careful honesty. Claire and I are committed to each other. We're taking things slow because we want to make sure we do this right for all of us. Marriage isn't something to rush into, but you love her right. The directness of children allowed no evasion. Ethan's eyes found Claire's something vulnerable and certain in his gaze. Yes, I love her, and you love Dad, and me. Emma's addition of herself to the equation revealed the real question underneath. Claire unbuckled her seatbelt, turning fully to meet the girl's eyes. I love you both. More than I knew I could love anyone. Then you should get married. That's what people do when they love each other and want to stay together forever. The simplicity of it cut through all the complications they'd been navigating. Emma climbed out of the car and headed inside, apparently satisfied now that she'd stated her position. Ethan and Claire remained in the vehicle, the heater running, while Colorado winter darkness fell around them. Well, that was subtle. His attempt at humor fell flat against the weight of what had just happened. Claire reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. She's not wrong, though. If we're doing this, really doing this, maybe we should stop hedging our bets. You want to get married? After 3 months, I want a commitment that matches what I'm feeling. I want Emma to stop waiting for me to leave. I want to build a life with you instead of maintaining this weird limbo where I'm half in Denver and half here. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. I don't have much to offer. A mortgaged house and a shop that does okay but won't make anyone rich. My life is... Your life is real. It's grounded in things that matter. I've had wealth and success, and none of it filled the hole your life fills. If we do this, there's no going back. Emma needs stability, not another person who tries and then gives up. I'm not giving up. I'm all in, Ethan. Completely, terrifyingly all in. He pulled her close across the center console, kissing her with an intensity that had been building through 3 months of careful boundaries. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. I want to do this right. Want to give you something better than a proposal in my driveway after a counseling session. I don't need better. I just need you. Still, let me plan something. Give me a week. That week stretched into 2 as Ethan worked on whatever he was planning with the secretiveness of someone who took proposals seriously. Claire caught him having whispered conversations with Maria at the shop, saw mysterious packages arriving at the house that Emma smuggled upstairs with conspiratorial glee. The anticipation built with delicious tension made sweeter by knowing what was coming, even without specifics. The surprise arrived on a Saturday morning when Ethan announced they were taking a drive. Emma had been deposited with Maria for a sleepover, giving them rare time alone. Claire expected romance, maybe a scenic overlook, or the restaurant in Denver they'd talked about trying. Instead, Ethan drove them back to the mountain road where they'd first reconnected, pulling into the same gravel turnout where her Mercedes had died months ago. Why are we here? Because this is where it started, where you came back into my life and turned everything upside down in the best possible way. He killed the engine, the December cold seeping in immediately. Ethan reached into the truck bed, pulling out a heavy blanket and a thermos that promised hot coffee. They walked to the edge where the mountain dropped away into valley views, spreading the blanket on a relatively flat outcrop. Sitting there with coffee warming her hands and Ethan's arm around her shoulders, Claire felt the rightness of the location settle into her bones. This spot had been a crisis that became a turning point, mechanical failure that led to finding what she'd been missing for 15 years. I made you something. Ethan pulled a small wooden box from his jacket pocket, handcrafted with joints so precise they were nearly invisible. The wood had been oiled to a warm glow, simple and beautiful in its functionality. Inside, nestled on velvet he'd probably bought at a craft store, sat a ring. Not diamond, because Claire had never cared about diamonds. Instead, a band of titanium with an intricate pattern etched around the circumference, gears and pistons rendered in miniature, a mechanic's art translated into jewelry. I made it in the shop. Took me about 40 hours spread over 2 weeks. The pattern is based on the engine of a 1969 Mustang because that was the first car I ever fully rebuilt with my dad. Claire lifted the ring with trembling fingers, seeing the care in every detail, the hours of work that represented more value than any store-bought stone. It's perfect. Ethan took it from her, holding it poised at the tip of her ring finger. Claire Donovan, you walked back into my life when I'd convinced myself I was fine being alone. You saw past the grease stains and modest house to something worth fighting for. You love my daughter like she's yours, and she loves you back even though she's terrified to admit it. You make me believe in second chances and futures worth planning for. Will you marry me? The words came out steady despite emotion thickening his voice. Claire's vision blurred with tears that had nothing to do with wind or cold. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, the fit perfect because he'd apparently been measuring her jewelry when she wasn't paying attention. They kissed with the mountain wind whipping around them, sealing a promise that had started 15 years ago and finally found its moment. Planning the wedding revealed just how different their worlds remained. Claire's assistant suggested venues that could accommodate 300 guests, while Ethan looked at her like she'd proposed holding it on Mars. They compromised on the small Baptist church where he'd married Sarah, a choice that initially made Claire's stomach clench with insecurity until Ethan explained. Sarah would want this. She told me before she died that if anything happened to her, she didn't want me to spend my life alone. She literally made me promise I'd find someone else to love. The generosity of a dying woman thinking about her husband's future happiness made Claire cry in a way board meetings never had. They kept the guest list to 75, mixing Ridgemont locals with Denver executives in what promised to be either a beautiful fusion or spectacular disaster. Emma threw herself into planning with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession, sketching dress designs and debating flower arrangements with the seriousness of a child who'd never been to a wedding and wanted this one to be perfect. Claire included her in every decision, learning to navigate the balance between honoring Emma's mother and building their own traditions. The morning of Emma's spring break, Claire was helping the girl organize her science fair project when the school's front office called. A woman's voice, unfamiliar and hesitant, asked if Claire could come pick Emma up early. When she arrived, she found Emma sitting in the counselor's office with red eyes and the counselor hovering with professional concern. Emma asked to call you instead of her father. I wanted to respect that, but I think you should know what happened. The counselor explained that Emma's class had been discussing family trees, and Emma had included both Sarah and Claire on hers. Another student had questioned whether she could have two mothers, leading to an argument that ended with Emma in tears. Driving Emma home, Claire waited for the girl to speak first. Finally, in a voice small and uncertain, Emma broke the silence. Is it okay to have two moms? Like, am I betraying Mom? Sarah by loving you too? The question Claire had been waiting for, dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Your mom, Sarah, will always be your mom. Nothing changes that, not me marrying your dad or you calling me mom or anything else. Love isn't a pie where giving someone a slice means less for someone else. It's more like a fire. The more you share it, the bigger it grows. She pulled into the driveway, turning to face Emma directly. Your heart is big enough for both of us, and I promise I'm not trying to replace your mom. I'm just trying to be someone else who loves you and your dad with everything I have. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt, then launched herself across the console into Claire's arms. Can I call you Mom? Claire. So there's Mom. Sarah in heaven and Mom Claire here with me. The honor of it. The trust required for Emma to offer that title broke something open in Claire's chest. I would love that, more than almost anything. Almost. Well, I'd love it even more if we went inside and made those brownies we've been talking about. Emma pulled back, grinning through residual tears. The ones with the peanut butter swirl, those exact ones. They spent the afternoon covered in flour and chocolate, making a mess of Ethan's kitchen while debating the merits of various scientific theories. When Ethan came home to find them laughing over burned edges and arguing about whether to save him any, the look on his face suggested he'd found them exactly as he'd hoped. That night, after Emma was in bed, He pulled Claire onto the porch where so many of their important conversations had happened. "She called you Mom today, at dinner. Did you notice I noticed? And it felt like the most natural thing in the world." Ethan pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "You know this means you're stuck with us, right? No backing out now that you've been officially promoted to mom status." "Wouldn't dream of it." They stood like that, wrapped in each other and the cool April evening, until the distant sound of Emma calling for water sent Ethan inside with a kiss and a promise to return. Claire waited on the porch, looking out at the small yard where Emma's soccer ball sat abandoned, and Ethan's truck gleamed under the streetlight, and felt a contentment she'd never achieved through any business success. The week before the wedding, Sarah's mother Linda requested a meeting. Claire drove to her house in Boulder with Ethan beside her for support, nervous about facing the woman whose daughter she was in some ways replacing. Linda greeted them at the door of a modest craftsman filled with photos of Sarah, at every age a shrine to a life cut short. Over tea that Claire barely touched, Linda studied her with assessing eyes that missed nothing. "Emma talks about you constantly. Mom Claire this, Mom Claire that. It's been both wonderful and heartbreaking to hear. I never wanted to erase Sarah's memory. I've tried so hard to honor." Linda held up a hand, stopping her. "I know, I can see it in how you talk about her, how you've made sure Emma remembers. But I need to tell you something, and it's important you hear it." She pulled out a letter, the paper creased from repeated reading. "Sarah wrote this a week before she died. She knew the cancer was winning, and she wanted to leave instructions for Ethan about moving on. She was very specific." Linda handed the letter to Claire, who took it with trembling hands. Sarah's handwriting was neat despite illness, her words carrying the clarity of someone who'd thought deeply about what mattered. The letter spoke directly to the situation they now faced. Sarah's voice reaching from beyond death with startling prescience. She wrote about Ethan deserving love again, about Emma needing a mother figure who would cherish rather than compete with memories. She wrote about hoping whoever came next would be strong enough to honor the past while building a future. The final paragraph hit Claire like a blow to the chest. "If you're reading this, unknown woman who loves my husband and daughter, please know you have my blessing. Love them fiercely. Protect Emma's memories of me while making new ones with her. And tell Ethan it's okay to let go of guilt and hold on to joy." Claire's tears fell onto the paper, smudging ink that had already been stained by Linda's grief. Linda took the letter back gently, her own eyes wet. "Sarah would have liked you. She valued strength and intelligence, and people who did what needed doing without complaint. You're exactly the kind of woman she'd choose for Ethan. I don't know what to say. Say you'll take care of them. Say you'll love them even when it's hard. Say you'll stick around through the messy parts. I promise. All of that and more." Linda nodded, satisfied. "Then you have my blessing too, and I have something for you." She disappeared upstairs, returning with a garment bag. Inside, woefully preserved in archival plastic, was a wedding veil of delicate lace that had clearly been loved and cherished. This was Sarah's veil, and her mother's before her. "I want you to wear it when you marry Ethan." The offer should have felt macabre, but instead it felt like acceptance, like being welcomed into a family that extended beyond death. Claire accepted with reverence, understanding the trust being placed in her. "There's one more thing." Linda handed over a sealed envelope addressed to Emma in Sarah's handwriting. "Sarah wrote this for Emma's wedding day, whenever that might be. She asked me to give it to whoever Emma considered her mother when the time came. I think that's you now." The responsibility of it, the trust required to hold this final message from Sarah to her daughter, made Claire's hands shake. Linda gripped her shoulders with surprising strength. "You're doing beautifully. Both of you are. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The wedding day arrived with Colorado spring weather that couldn't decide between sunshine and storms. Claire woke in her cabin for the last time, boxes already packed for the move into Ethan's house that would become theirs. Her assistant had flown in from Denver, along with her board members, creating a surreal mix of her two worlds about to collide in a small-town church. Maria appeared at noon with Emma in tow, both of them armed with makeup and hair supplies. The three of them transformed the cabin into a preparation headquarters, Emma surprisingly adept at styling hair, while Maria provided running commentary on Ridgemont gossip. When Claire finally stood in Sarah's wedding dress, altered to fit her frame but still carrying the previous bride's essence, Emma's eyes went wide. "You look like a princess, like the kind from movies who saves herself instead of waiting for rescue. Best compliment I've ever received." Emma handed her the veil, the lace delicate, and waited with meaning. As Claire secured it, she thought about Sarah writing letters to a future she wouldn't see, giving permission for the life unfolding today. The generosity of it still staggered her. The church was small and packed, every pew filled with people from both her worlds. She recognized her CFO sitting next to Jake from the garage, her board chair chatting with Nancy the waitress. The fusion should have been awkward, but somehow the shared purpose of witnessing this union smoothed the edges between corporate and small-town cultures. Ethan stood at the altar in a suit he'd clearly purchased rather than rented, the expense visible in the fit and quality. His eyes found hers as she appeared at the church entrance, and the emotion that crossed his face made every doubt and fear worth enduring. Emma walked ahead of her, scattering rose petals with solemn concentration. She'd insisted on being both flower girl and Claire's attendant, refusing to be relegated to just one role. When they reached the altar, Emma stepped aside but stayed close, making clear her investment in this union. The minister, a woman who'd known Ethan since childhood, spoke about second chances and families formed through choice rather than obligation. She acknowledged Sarah's place in their history with grace that made Linda smile through tears in the front pew. When it came time for vows, Ethan spoke first, his voice steady despite emotion threatening to crack it. "Claire, you walked into my life when I'd convinced myself that closed doors were safer than open ones. You proved me wrong with patience and persistence and love that refused to be convenient or safe. You love my daughter like she's your own, and she loves you back with a trust I wasn't sure she'd ever give again. Today I'm not just gaining a wife, I'm completing a family, and I promise to spend every day earning the gift of your presence in our lives." Claire's turn came with tears already streaming, her carefully prepared words forgotten in favor of raw truth. "Ethan, 15 years ago, you showed me what it meant to be seen and valued for who I was rather than what I could become. You protected me without diminishing me, supported me without controlling me. Then life took you away, and I spent a decade and a half trying to fill the hole you left. I built an empire trying to prove I was worthy of the girl you stayed up all night talking to. But I was looking in the wrong places, building the wrong things. Real success isn't measured in revenue or market share. It's measured in moments like these, in the family we're creating, in the love that's big enough to honor the past while embracing the future. I promise to choose us every day, to prioritize what matters, and to love you and Emma with everything I have." The minister pronounced them married, and Ethan kissed her with a tenderness that suggested he was still half afraid she might vanish if he held too tight. Emma whooped from beside them, breaking the solemnity with 8-year-old enthusiasm that made everyone laugh. The reception at Cole Auto Repair had been transformed by strings of lights and tables borrowed from every church in town. Claire's catering company mingled with Ridgemont potluck dishes in a fusion menu that represented their merged lives. Her CFO learned line dancing from Nancy, while Jake explained transmission repair to a fascinated board member. During the first dance, Ethan held her close and whispered against her ear, "No regrets, not a single one. Even though you're now married to a mechanic instead of some corporate executive, especially because of that. The executive types never understood what matters, and what matters? This. You, Emma, coming home to people who love me for who I am rather than what I've achieved." The music shifted, and Emma appeared at their side, demanding her turn to dance with both of them. They swayed together, the three of them, while cameras flashed and guests smiled at the picture they created. Later, after cake had been cut and toasts delivered, Linda approached with the envelope she'd shown Claire weeks earlier. Emma was busy showing Claire's assistant her science fair project, giving the adults a moment. This is for you. Linda pressed the envelope into Claire's hands. Sarah's final letter meant for Emma's wedding day. When the time comes, you'll know what to do with it. What if I don't? What if I mess this up? You won't. You're already doing better than you think. Linda hugged her, the embrace carrying acceptance that meant more than any board approval Claire had ever received. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Claire found herself on the garage's back steps with Ethan and Emma, the three of them exhausted and happy in equal measure. Emma had fallen asleep between them, her head on Claire's shoulder and feet in Ethan's lap. This is it. Our family. Ethan's voice carried wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe the turn his life had taken. This is it. Claire looked down at the ring Ethan had made for her, the titanium catching light from the strings overhead. Somewhere in Denver, her former life continued without her constant presence, the empire she'd built running smoothly under new leadership. She'd restructured it, downsized her role-chosen people over profit in a way her younger self would never have understood. But sitting here with her husband and daughter, Claire knew with bone-deep certainty that she'd made the right choice. Success wasn't about building the biggest company or achieving the highest title. It was about finding people worth coming home to, worth rearranging your life around, worth choosing every single day. Emma stirred, mumbling something about wanting to go home. Ethan stood lifting his daughter with practiced ease while Claire gathered their belongings. They walked to the truck together, a family now in every sense that mattered, heading toward a future that wouldn't always be easy, but would be real. The house felt different when they arrived, transformed from Ethan's space into their shared home by the simple fact of Claire's belongings finally moved in completely. Emma sleepwalked through teeth brushing and pajamas, climbing into bed without her usual delaying tactics. Claire tucked her in while Ethan watched from the doorway. "Love you, Mom, Claire." The words came out drowsy but certain, hitting Claire's heart with the force of vows spoken hours earlier. "Love you too, sweetheart. Sleep well." She joined Ethan in the hallway, both of them standing in the doorway, watching Emma's chest rise and fall with sleep's rhythm. "She called you Mom, Claire, not just Mom. She's making sure Sarah stays part of it, as it should be. Sarah's her mother, too. Nothing about me being here changes that." Ethan pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist from behind. "How did I get so lucky to have loved Sarah and now get to love you too? To have a daughter who's big enough to make room for both. Maybe luck has nothing to do with it. Maybe this is what happens when people are brave enough to try again." They stood like that until the house settled into nighttime quiet, then retreated to their bedroom. The space had been Ethan's for years, but Claire's presence had gradually transformed it into theirs. Her books on the nightstand, her clothes in the closet, her life intertwined with his in ways that felt both new and ancient. Making love that night carried different weight than before, sanctified by vows and witnessed commitment. Afterward, tangled in sheets and each other, Ethan traced patterns on her shoulder. "I keep thinking about what Emma said months ago, that if we loved each other, we should make it official." She was right. Kids see things more clearly than adults sometimes. She sees what matters. We spend so much time overcomplicating things that should be simple, like the fact that I love you and you love me and we want to build a life together. Exactly like that. Claire drifted toward sleep, wrapped in warmth and safety. The sound of Ethan's breathing steadying into the rhythm she'd learned meant he'd already crossed into dreams. She thought about the girl she'd been 15 years ago, scared and hungry, and convinced she needed to prove her worth through achievement. That girl would be stunned by this ending, married to a mechanic stepmother, to a grieving child living in a modest house in a tiny Colorado town. But that girl had also been lonely in ways she hadn't fully understood, measuring success by metrics that left her empty, despite hitting every goal. This version of Claire, the one who'd chosen small-town life over corporate empire, knew what the younger version hadn't. Love measured in daily presence meant more than power measured in market share. The house creaked as it settled, Emma's soft snoring drifting down the hall. Ethan's arm heavy across her waist. Claire smiled into the darkness, thinking about tomorrows filled with school pickups and shop paperwork and board meetings conducted via video call. Thinking about the life she'd built not through climbing ladders but through showing up day after day for the people who mattered. Sometimes the stranger who stops to fix your car on a mountain road isn't a stranger at all. Sometimes they're the answer you've been searching for, the home you didn't know you needed, the future you gave up trying to imagine. And sometimes, if you're brave enough and patient enough and willing enough to tear down walls you spent years building, you get to keep them. Claire had spent 15 years becoming someone the world would respect. Now she got to spend the rest of her life being someone her family loved. And that she thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was the definition of success that had been missing all along.